Good evening, everybody. It is office. I've got to stop doing that. Every time I do it, the camera bounces around. Welcome to Office Hours again. It's February. Hope you had a good Valentine's Day with whatever loved ones you have. I had an excellent Valentine's Day, which I'll get to when I talk about my India trip. Sing out in the chat line if you can't see me or hear me. I think I've got everything sorted out. The chat should be turned on, so everyone should be able to chat as well. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves or directly to me. Either is fine. Word of warning, I'm pretty tired. I had a 4 a.m. Zoom call this morning. It's 9 p.m. now in Perth time with a customer in the USA, which was very fruitful. We had some good resolutions, but yeah, it's been a long, long day. And the other thing I'll warn you about is stupid me, having been to India recently and thinking that my tolerance for spicy food is through the roof. I laid into the chili tonight. So literally, I'll be blowing my nose like every 7 minutes because my nose is still running, and literally, I'm just like I've been sweating for the last hour. So yeah, it's going to get wet and it's going to get sneezy and blowy, but it serves me right for getting stuck into the chili. The chat's going already. Dear, good morning, Perth. 9 p.m. Don't you say good morning to me. Okay, just kidding. Let's share my screen and let's get into it and let's get some stuff going. Okay, so hopefully you can see me, you can see the slides and everything's cool. Okay, as always, getting in touch is easy. Just scan the QR code or head over to linktree/Connor. Generally, that's still my Twitter DM. I still hang out on Twitter, even though it's, let's face it, it's a bit of a cesspool, but still hang on Twitter, also on Blue Sky. Interestingly, I was in India last week, and certainly the driving social media platform there, where it terms people posting a lot of their stuff, seems to have become LinkedIn. So for tech content, I'm trying to post as much on LinkedIn as I can, but that seems to be the place at the moment. So I think given that the problems with Twitter and the fact that Blue Sky is still coming up to speed, you'll find me either on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Blue Sky. More chat. Hello from Switzerland. Is that Alan Lacour? Oh. Anyway, I digress. I can't be catching up with friends when we got so much to talk about. As for those new to Office Hours, don't adjust your set. You'll see the slide content a little bit strange, like as opposed to a normal presentation. That's because we turn this into a YouTube video and we put my ugly mug normally at the top right-hand corner or somewhere where it's not going to disrupt the slides. Nothing more frustrating than having someone's webcam picture over the most important little piece of content that you are hoping to pick up. A few bits and pieces like I always do in terms of promoting the events that are coming up and things that have just gone by. In terms of products, if you didn't see it, just, what's that, 20th, that's 8 days ago. So yeah, a week ago, SQL CL, you could call it the final 2024 version, but effectively release date just early 2025, has come out. Lots of goodies in there. My subjective feel is it seems to be quicker than all the previous SQL CL releases, so update yourself. It always blows my mind when people say, it's too complicated to update SQL CL or SQL Developer. Literally, download the zip, unzip it, run it. If you have some problems, guess what? Just use the previous one. It's like not complicated. I'm always struggling when people say, upgrade, etc., etc. Just roll it out, see what happens, roll it back if you had to. Things coming up, the Dallas Oracle User Training Day. So if you're in the US, March 13th, get along to that. That's coming up soon. Apex World also coming up, I think March 15th in Europe. So we got Northern America, Europe, plenty of good stuff there for anyone to go along to if you're in those regions. I've just been for a week at India for the All India Oracle User Group Multi-Cloud Week. That was fantastic. I always love going to India, as most people know. But the thing that was really cool is it was a multi-cloud theme. And I'll be honest, I was dubious. But we had speakers there from Microsoft, AWS, Google, and Oracle, naturally. And it was great in the sense that everyone was, we even posted some photos of all the various vendors all standing in line for a selfie, which was nice. But yeah, we all got on really well. It's great to see that new spirit of partnership. And it was really interesting to hear what they're doing in terms of talking about the Oracle database availability in these non-Oracle clouds. So that was really cool. For me, the highlight was just the people. So passionate, so engaged. One of the events was at a college in Pune, so the heavy influx of students there as well. They were just fantastic. Quick funny story, I was doing a talk on normalization. At the end of the talk, this woman says, "Can I have a word, please?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." She goes, I'm the professor of computer science at this college. I teach the normalization unit. So that was interesting. But I have to admit, she gave me positive reviews. Didn't tear me to shreds. But yeah, that was interesting because she teaches the theory, and I was doing a talk on normalization in the real world. So it was an interesting conversation we had. But yeah, just fantastic event over there, and I can't recommend enough. If you're ever in India, go to one of these events. Wonderful. What else we got? During that week in India, I went to Cloud World Mumbai. Once again, lots of cool stuff there. That was the All India user group. Really cool demo. This was an AI hologram. So it looks like three-dimensional, but if it's set behind it, it's just a projection. But you could talk to it, and you could ask it questions, and it would go into a ChatGPT style interface, and then it would actually, basically speak to you back with its answer. It was very cool. And that's the database booth that I hung out most of the day at. So so I had a lot of people there, about 3,000 people in Mumbai. Really cool event. Speaking of Cloud World, if you're in Singapore, I'll be doing a database talk in Singapore at Cloud World Singapore. So please come say hi. Love going to Singapore. The other thing is, as you'd imagine, Cloud World events are often perhaps a little bit more high level than the DBAs tend to prefer. But as a result, the following day in Singapore, we're doing a deep dive. So at the Oracle office, there's the link there. But Adrian from the Apex, Heliscale, you probably know from Finland, data modeling and AI and machine learning. I'm doing some database talks. We're hoping to all get one laser as well. So lots of cool stuff there for a technology day as well. I'll also be speaking in Cloud World Sydney for any Australians on the call who are silly enough to be up at 9 p.m. at night, local time, or even later if you're in Sydney. So if you're in Sydney, come say hi. What else is coming up? The Ascend User Conference, I think their call for presentations might have just finished, but Ascend's coming up in June, as is Kscope. They're two events I've submitted for. Hopefully I'll get selected, but if you're in the States, then there are two big events coming up. A couple other fresh call for papers, because I'm always encouraging people to get along and see these things, either as speakers or attendees. The Polish Oracle User Group event, always a fantastic event. Really hardcore technology, but with a really relaxed feel to it. Call for papers ends in March, so head over to there. And finally, the Croatian event. I was lucky enough to do my first ever Croatian user group event last year, but this year is their 30th anniversary. That is spectacular when you think about it, that a user group can be going successfully for 30 years. That's a credit to Devor and his organization. Fantastic. So the call for papers is out there. Can't recommend that highly enough. Once again, really relaxed feel, but lots of really deep dive core tech. And as you can see, they're just a magnificent venue. Having spruiked up all the user groups and everything, I have to offer an apology. I got accepted or asked to speak at the Italian Oracle User Group event in May, and the Norwegian event, which is on the boat again this year. I've been on the boat a few times. Both of these are just fantastic events. Milan is beautiful, especially in May. The boat conference going through the fjords and everything is just amazing. I got asked to speak at both these things, and unfortunately, I've got some family commitments in early May which came out of nowhere, so I've had to pull out of those two. So I just want to take this moment to apologize to those two user groups. Sorry for letting you down, but hopefully I'll be back there at some stage next year. All of that, obviously, as always, as I normally say, hopefully in less than 10 minutes, is support your local user groups. There's plenty of user group events. The more they prosper, the more we prosper as a community, the more we share knowledge, the better it is. So hopefully that's what we're aiming to do. So what have we got on tonight? Let's have a look. Some of the questions have come in. Dealing with SQL macros and partitions, how to validate a URL from inside the database, vector indexes. This is a result of a couple of talks I gave in India. OPatch and dealing with patch information from inside the database, controlling Apex email, autonomous service levels on the autonomous database and some of the implications of using them. And then an interesting question, which we might not get to, which is someone said, how do I build my demos? And so I thought I'd just touch on that lightly. That won't take long. So 7 things to get through. Hopefully we'll get through them all. We'll do our best. Some of them are a bit longer than others, but we'll do our best and see how we go. Let's get on to question 1. SQL macros and partitions. Here's the question that came in. We want to use a SQL macro to query a single table partition, but there does not seem to be a way of specifying a partition name in the parameters. And this is a genuine issue, and I thought we'd show you the issue and the workaround, because SQL macros, I did a blog post recently saying I think they're an absolute game changer. The ability to capture snippets of SQL that you can then reuse in all sorts of interesting ways, I think is amazing. We've already seen heaps of really cool use cases for SQL macros floating around there on the intertubes. But yeah, so this is an interesting one that I thought we'd cover on today. So let's bring up that. So for those that are unfamiliar with SQL macros, I thought I'd give like the world's quickest primer on what they actually are, and then we'll go into what the issue is and how to work around it. So here's what looks like a pure SQL function, something that would actually do something with the data. But in fact, it's not. The special thing here is this thing here where it returns what's called a SQL macro. And what it does is it returns a piece of SQL text. In this case, I'm returning a very simple join between the employee and department table, your stock standard scott.emp schema. But when we actually do execute on that function, what we actually do is we go get the return SQL text from that function and then fold it into the actively running SQL statement. So it becomes effectively a way of dynamically generating SQL. And I won't go too much into the details, but it does it in a very, very secure and non-SQL injectable way. So this query, or this function, emp plus dname, is something I can now query. And when I query it, it'll actually insert this SQL. So just to show, if I do select star from emp plus dname, I actually get the results of this join, which is actually this query. So effectively, I'm splicing in a piece of SQL text into this execution, which is super cool. Why is this super cool? Well, let's drop it and recreate it, for example, with just a view, a standard view like this. So this is now just a view. If I query that, you're thinking, well, what's the difference? Like, why wouldn't I just create a view? Why would I put dynamic SQL inside a SQL macro, something like that, when I can just do it as a view? Well, consider requirements like this. What if you want to pass parameters to your SQL statement or a view? Something you can't do with a normal database view. Here, for example, I can pass in a department number, and now I return an SQL that looks like this. Notice I'm not using concatenation here. This is one of the examples of how it's not SQL injectable. This has actually been treated similar to a bind variable. So now I can do select star from employee dem and pass in parameters. You can't do that with a database view. Now, cynics may be out there going, well, hold on a second. If I've got a database view defined as just a join, then I can still do where department number equals against the database view. I can just, the database is very good at grabbing predicates and pushing them into the view definition. This is true. I'm not saying you would replace every view with a SQL macro. But consider something like this. What if I had a hierarchical query where I want to start at some particular point in the hierarchy and do a typical sort of connect by query, for example, to navigate through an employee hierarchy? You can't do that with a view and pass in a value, because a view can only have a where clause predicate done. And we don't want a where clause, we want to actually nominate the starting point in the hierarchy. So this is one simple example of where a parameter to a SQL macro is already superior in terms of its functionality capability to just a view. So now I can say jump into the hierarchy at spot 7839, which happens to be the top of the hierarchy. But I can also jump into the hierarchy at 7698, which jumps in the lower spot. Once again, effectively, we know it's a function, but your average consumer is going to go, well, that looks like select star from a table where I can actually pass a parameter. It's a parameterized view. So very, very cool. SQL macros. We could talk for a whole session on SQL macros. This was just to show you why I think they're a real game changer. Extending even further is the tables inside your SQL macros can be passed as parameters as well. There's a special parameter type called dmstf table T, and I can say the table name is provided at runtime. So select star from P tab. So I can do select star from the employee table. I can do select star from the department table. I can pass in a table name as well. Alan's asking, it could be done with a pipeline function, isn't it? But it is easy this way. Yes, valid. You could do it with a pipeline function, but don't forget with a pipeline function, you have to define the return data type, as in like a nested table of an object type. Notice these two examples here, Alan. I've got different sets of columns coming back from the same macro. So it's a bit more powerful and flexible. But yeah, valid point. But here's an example where I can pass in the table name as well. Let's now get to the problem at hand. Given that I can pass in a table name and dynamically query from any arbitrary table, let's take a table that is partitioned. This is a table called T. It's partitioned with list, and it's got simply sys, system, and default. And it takes all the rows from DBA objects. So we've got probably 10 or 20 different owners in there. Some of them will go in this position, some in this position, and everything else will go in this one. Let's say I want to query just one of these partitions. That's how we can do it in standard SQL syntax. Select count star from part T, partition, and nominate the partition name. The question is, can we do this in a SQL macro? The question that came in was, we don't think we can. So let's have a crack at it. I'm going to have the partition name as a parameter. So I do select count star from T, partition name, and the parameter comes in from here. And let's see what I give it a run. It says that partition does not exist. And as a result, we can see that even though this is a parameter, it's not really like appending varchar to strings. It's a sort of a pseudo bind variable, and you can't do a bind variable for the partition syntax. So using it what we'd say the intuitive sense doesn't work. So let's explore a bit further. What if I actually said something like this? I'm the same query again, but I'm going to spit out what the parameter name is so I can actually see what's coming in to explore why this is going wrong. And if we look along, it says does not exist, and we look at the par name, it's null. And this is a key thing. You cannot utilize the values of these parameters inside, or these string parameters inside a macro. Why do we do this? Because that would create opportunities for SQL injection. So we bar you from doing that. Numbers are okay because you can't really SQL inject with a number, but for things like strings, this string here, unless it's being used as effectively a pseudo bind, will not be instantiated. It's always set to null. So that's not going to work. What if I actually don't put it in quotes? What if I say, well, maybe I just do the word sys, the actual partition name? That doesn't work either. As I said, it's like a pseudo bind. That doesn't work. We wouldn't be able to do concatenation because, as we've seen, the value as it comes in is null. So we're sort of a bit stuck. What if I do something like this? I just pass in the table name, like a normal query, just pass in the table name, and then at runtime, I try pass in the extra parts that we would normally pass in. That doesn't work either. That's my next attempt at trying to get somehow forcing the nominator partition into this syntax. One way you could do it, but this is really a bit sort of smoke and mirrors, is SQL macros can also work with tables that have been defined as a common table expression. So I could actually do with something called onepar as being this partition, and then I could then query from the onepar using my SQL macro. But I haven't really gained anything here because I've still had to hard code the partition name in here. So yes, I'm passing something as a parameter here, but really I've just shifted the problem from here up to here. I can't pass that in as a bind variable or dynamically, so I haven't really gained a great deal. So how do we do it? Well, one of the places you can pass in strings into a SQL macro is the list of columns you would like to get back from an expression. It can be used in, if you're using SQL macros to dynamically specify a list of columns you'd like from your SQL statement. So this is normally reserved for putting in column names, but we can use one of the column names as the partition name. It preserves that access to the string as it passed in. So I'm saying the partition name will come in as a column data type. Now this thing allows multiple columns to be passed, which means it's an array. So now I'm doing select count star from partition and actually concatenating in the first element of that array. Now this is something that's not great, because that also means we have that worry now that, could someone maybe SQL inject it? And luckily, we probably can't. And the reason for that is we still have this columns keyword here. Notice it's not a string anymore. It's actually a list of columns. So now I'm saying I've got a list of columns. The first column is sys, which actually we're going to use as a partition name. So there's our workaround. I'm not a huge fan. Shout out to Chris Saxon for giving that workaround. He led me down that direction. It works and it gets you around the problem. I'm not really a huge fan, but that's currently the only way you'll be able to do it. We've got an enhancement request to somehow manipulate partition name syntax in there, but as it currently stands, that's the way you'll need to do it. Okay, next one. No questions on that? Cool, let's charge on. Validating a URL. Here's the question that came in. If I have a URL saved in a database table, is there any way I can test to see if the URL is a valid URL? I don't mean the format of the URL, but the actual target site. And my answer to that, as always, generally is yes and no. So we'll do a demo and see why we can sort of get close, but we'll have to do a little bit of exploration and throw in some caveats here as well. So here we go. So I'll start with shameless self-promotion. Connor-mcdonald.com, that's my website. I know that's valid, but we're going to build a little utility to see if we can prove it's valid. Now, whatever facility you use inside the database, whether it's the Apex Web Services, etc., generally all these things are layers on top of UTL HTTP, which is the facility that does external HTTP calls to the website. So forgetting about the database for a second, the way we can generally see if a website is valid, or at least responding in some way, is by actually reaching out to it and checking the response code. So putting aside the database for a second, if I use wget or curl, doesn't really matter, wget to this will actually save a copy of the homepage to index.html, but also notice somewhere, where are we? Here we go. Yep, it says the response was 200. Now we can go Google what the various HTTP response codes are, but 200 means life is good. So this says, yep, there's a very good chance this website is both available, the domain name's there, and it actually is responding to requests, and it sent some information down. So that's one way of doing it, forgetting about the database. Now, you could actually do it a little bit more cleanly using something like curl with a little bit of regular expressions in there, which simply says do the same thing, but just return the status code only. So that's simply the same mechanism, but using it, stripping out all the redundant text to just get the HTTP status code. We want to replicate that, but from in the database. So this is the easiest way to do it. As I said, UTL HTTP is pretty much the base layer from which all other external services come from typically. And so I'll simply put my URL in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little trick here, which is cool in 23 AI, but backported to 21 and 19 in the later RUs. You don't have to set up a wallet anymore. You can simply say, I want to use the wallets available on my OS system, my operating system certificates, and I don't have to worry about setting up a wallet and going to the website and going to the padlock and exporting the certificates, all that nonsense. I still have to set up the network ACLs, but I've done that in advance here. So I'm going to see if I can reach out to Connor McDonald, begin a request, get a response, and then check the status code, which should be hopefully the same. So I run that and look at that. There we go. Oops, don't make that small. There we go. Response code 200. It seems like the job is done. Here we have a URL validation facility, which is sort of good, but let's now explore a bit further. Someone said, I'm going to pass in a URL, which means what if it's a URL you've never seen? For example, let's try another one, LinkedIn, using the exact same piece of code. I get network access denied. Anyone that's done outcalling services from the database knows that to access any endpoint outside the database is a privilege. And so you have to set up what we call network access control lists to let you access on certain ports to certain hosts, etc. So while it's fine if you have a fixed list of URLs you want to go out to, if you're letting people type in URLs and you want to validate them, then you would actually need to define an ACL for every single different URL that comes in, or set it to asterisk, which allows all URLs. That's generally not a good idea, because that's obviously a security risk waiting to happen. But this is one of the challenges for a start. You now need to look at, defining ACLs for all these things as they come in. Look at the chat. Set your ACL to allow access to any server outside. Oh, I'm not a fan, but I take your point. But let's say I've done that. Let's say I've said, all the ACLs, I'll just make it asterisk, or I've got a fixed list or something. Whatever it is, I've overcome somehow the network ACL problem. There are greater challenges ahead. Let's look at this one. I'm going to oracle.com now. Now, I think you and I know that this is a valid website. So let's give it a run, and we get 403. 403, I can't remember the exact text, but it's something along the lines of forbidden, your request is invalid, etc. It comes back and says, nope, you're not allowed to do that. Now, as I said, I'm pretty confident at this moment in time the oracle.com website is not down, because there'd be a lot of emails in my inbox and everyone else's inbox. What's gone on here is a lot of websites have rules associated with them in terms of who can reach out to them. In this case, it's saying, well, this looks like some sort of phishing attempt because it's not coming from a browser, it's not coming from a known service, so we're not going to block it. And this is one of the challenges. 403 could be the website is totally valid, but we don't like you, or it could be the website is not valid. So you have these challenges here. Just because you get a response code doesn't mean you can infer all these good things from it. This is how I got around it. I went into my browser and found the entire set of headers that actually get sent to oracle.com when I do a standard browser request, and simply cut and paste them into here. And you can see I'm setting header, set header, set header. So all this kind of stuff, etc., bits and pieces, the user agent, which is probably the key one. And I do all this. And look, now I can get to this website address. But this is something that is defined often on a website by website basis. The browser might send all this kind of stuff. The website might insist on some of it or all of it, etc. To prove this to you, I managed to reduce it down to this. Just the accept header, the priority header, and the user agent header. And that still worked. Now, other websites may insist upon more. It's quite challenging to do this from inside the database not because of the way the database works, because of the rules that websites generally attach to people coming into them. They don't like people coming in with these unknown agents, in this case UTL HTTP. They generally prefer things like browsers and the like. So you do need to be careful. As a result, one of the things I would probably recommend is considering what I would call non-database options. Now, I put non-database options in quote here because we saw in the example I used curl and wget to actually go get the response code. Really good idea is to, for example, if you can call a command line utility to do it, then you can use an external table, because an Oracle external table can have a preprocessor command which actually runs that command line. It's the easiest way of getting access to operating system scripts from inside the database. Another option is the database scheduler has the ability to run scripts as well. Both these things really are just hooks into the outside world where you can run things with perhaps a bit more flexibility, generally from the command like bash scripts, Corn shell scripts, etc., etc. Alternatively, you could stick a Java program inside the database. I'm not a huge fan of that. I think the complexity probably be fairly high, and also you get the same issues in terms of letting people out of the database. Something I haven't explored, but I know with 23AI, we now have JavaScript within the database. And one thing that we can be pretty confident on is if you can think of some common requirement anywhere in IT, validating URL, etc., there's probably a JavaScript library out there that does it, because there's just so many of them. So in 23AI, there might be some scope there for doing it in JavaScript, but probably for me, I would probably be looking at doing it probably with an external table and a preprocessor, rather than UTL HTTP, just to give me that extra level of control. But there are some options you might want to consider. Someone said, what does wget send to the web server? Out of the box, wget pretty much sends nothing, but you can, for example, get wget to go get information from existing cookies and send that along as well. So, and curl's the same. Both these things have nice facilities in them to get generally cookie information that you've previously got, etc., and send that along. So cookies, agent information, etc. So there's plenty of scope for adding that stuff into command line utilities. Patch information. We're doing okay. What are we averaging? About 10 minutes per one here, so we might get 5 done. Okay, we might aim for 6 maybe, because some of these are short. That's good. We're going well. Here's the question that came in. Are there any issues with giving access to the views which have patch information, like DBA registry SQL patch, DBMS O patch? I think that's a typo. I think it's DBMS QO patch. We'll explore. Very simple. My verdict on this. This is a bad idea, a really bad idea. Let me show you the facilities we have, and then I'll say why you should not be giving them to anyone. But we'll see how we go. One of the cool things that came in, this is testing my memory. I think it might have been 12.2, maybe earlier. So I'm sure someone will correct me on the chat. I think it might have been 12.2. We started exposing what would typically be operating system level information inside the database. So, and a lot of this I'm sure was driven by the movement to cloud, where obviously people don't get OS access. So we started introducing things where you could query the alert log from inside the database, you could query trace files inside the database, and you can query information about the Oracle inventory and patch levels inside the database. One of the obvious ones is DBA registry SQL patch. It's got a lot of stuff in there, but if I query it, you can get an idea for how lazy I've been. So this is a version 21 database, and you can see that I've applied, when I first downloaded it, I think it was 21.3. I applied 21.7, 21.8. Then I took a year off, did 21.12, 21.13. And just, I think a few weeks ago, 21.16 came out, And so I've recently applied that. So I would say this is fairly typical. Before you start shaming me for not applying every single RU, this is my home computer. Come on, I'm not running mission critical stuff on here. I would hope for your databases we have those every 3 months RUs being applied. But as we can see, the cool thing is you can query it from inside the database. The other thing we have is we have a package called DBMS QOpatch. Now, to give you an idea for perhaps its sensitivity, even though I'm logged on as a DBA here, I can't even describe it. I actually have to connect as a sysdba. Let me fly back, connect to sysdba, then I can describe it, and we can sort of see the kind of stuff in there. There's get opatch count, get opatch data, etc., etc. Now, I've set something running here. This gives you a clue that we're actually heading out to the outside world, the operating system level, and effectively running these equivalent commands of, say, opatch, in this case, opatch ls inventory. Come on, poor little computer. In fact, my problem here is it's going through, all those different RUs I've applied, etc. So we'll give it a bit longer. But effectively, if you've ever run opatch ls inventory, this is the same information coming out of the database. Now, opatch ls inventory is typically sort of a nicely formatted output. Because we're trying to get it as data here, this will come back as an XML output if it ever comes back. Chug, 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 chug. Come on. Come on. Talk amongst yourselves. There. I'll come back to that. We'll go back to the slides and we'll pop back and see if it's there. This is why I think it's a really bad idea. Let's say Oracle publishes some, critical security patch announcement saying, yep, we found this absolutely critical vulnerability. It's in all versions of version 21 of the database, but we'll be releasing a patch, ASAP. It'll be there in RU 21.17, and it addresses this critical vulnerability. Well, anyone that comes back along here, has it popped up yet, and says, yes, by querying this, because someone gave me access to it, I can see this database is at 21.16. I know this database hasn't been patched for that critical vulnerability. That's a disaster. We don't want to be doing that. So anything that reveals information about the patch level on your database, even, you could even argue even the version. People often give access to VDOLA version and they do select banner full from VDOLA version, which doesn't just say it's 21 anymore. It says it's 21.16 or 19.26. Even things like that, you could probably make a case for as being probably not a good idea to let people view, because the moment you give access, you're giving clues to someone about where your patch level is at, you're implicitly giving them clues as to where your vulnerabilities might lie. So leave that stuff there just for sysdba. It's made available to you as an administrator because often you don't get access to the operating system anymore, but don't give it out. I know sometimes people want to see it, but please don't give it out. It's just opening the door for security problems down the track. Higher service equals slower performance. Let's see the question that came in. We move some of our jobs in Autonomous, so someone's using Autonomous database, presumably on our cloud, but they could be using it on Google Cloud or Azure or AWS. How cool is that? I digress. I'm getting still excited about the multi-cloud event. We move some of our jobs in Autonomous from the low service to the medium service, and they generally ran slower. Things were even worse in the high service. Why is that? And I've actually blogged about this before, but it seems to keep coming up. So I wanted to do a real demo to show, and hopefully it'll work. Here's the key thing. Naturally, as human beings, we think low, medium, high is just variations of the same thing, and medium sounds more oomph than low, and high sounds even better than medium. But high and medium are not the same as the low service with more power. If you head over to the docs or any slides on Autonomous, you have what the services are, for example, on ATP, transaction processing. If you're on ADW, you only get low, medium, and high. But really, it doesn't really matter either way. We have the service names you have available to you so that you can connect to these various service names. We have the amount of resource management shares they have. And then we have the parallelism. That's the key box. Because parallelism, when most people, if you say to someone, I'm going to do something in parallel in the Oracle database, and almost implicitly they think, you're talking about parallel query. But this doesn't say parallel query, this says parallelism, which means parallel query and parallel DML. Anything we can parallelize, I'm going to struggle on that for a while, is going to be parallelized. And so that can have some implications when it comes to running in these services. Let's explore. The thing that I suppose want to say is, when you go, if you change from low to medium or medium to high or something like that, you might get a better result. You might get a different result, literally a totally different result. That might be slower, might be faster. You might even get errors where you didn't used to get them. Let's have a look at these things in order, and hopefully these demos will all run. I'm going to run against, I had to get an ATP where I had multiple CPUs, and my only one I have that is in the USA, so this might run a bit slow, but we'll see how we go. So just to show, I'm starting off in the low consumer group, just your stock standard connection. I'm connecting to my ATP database, and I'm connecting to the low user group. I'm going to create a table called T, which is 40 copies of DB object. That gives me, I think, about 1.5 million rows. But rather than query that table and have it run for 10 minutes and have it massive, I'm simply going to lie. I'm going to tell the database this thing is huge, but it's not really that big. That way, when we run queries against it, you and I won't be sitting here twiddling our thumbs going, isn't this an interesting demo? So that's what I've got. It's a moderately big table, 1.5 million rows, somewhere that, but I've told the database it's a lot, much bigger than that. So I'm going to do a delete. So I'm going to delete where the owner is in sys and public, which turns out to be about half the rows. And the little prompt is telling me to get the next one ready. And this is a typical kind of job where I'm doing sort of, divide and conquer. This session here is going to delete sys and public. And this session here is going to delete not sys and public, therefore covering all the rows in the table. So let's give it a go. So start that one going, and let's see how long they take. I had a crack at this earlier. I think it's about 15 seconds, somewhere around there. We'll see how we go. While that's going, questions. Leslie said, can we also view if data patch was executed? Good question. I think you can. I think there's another DBA registry view, which I think includes that. Please don't take that as gospel, but I think you can. And if not, I imagine you'd be able to query from the alert log, because you'd probably get something like PDB violations populated in the alert log, but that's obviously a little bit more roundabout. Back to our demo. So as we can see, effectively, this session took about 15 seconds. This took about 15 seconds as well. If we have a look at how it ran, it simply did effectively a delete from storage, right? Same here, just delete, table storage full. It says parallel DML was disabled because the object not decorated the parallel clause, and when you connect as low, you only get access to one CPU, so there's no parallel query run. But remember that it took about 15 seconds. Now, I'm sitting here as my autonomous user thinking I've just paid all this money for this beautiful autonomous database. I know it's got plenty of CPUs. I want to get faster than 15 seconds. I'm going to, flip over from the low service, and I'm going to use the high service and see how we go. So let's do that. This is the exact same script, but all I'm doing is now connecting to the high service. So as we said, now we're connecting to the high service. I'm creating my table with its 40 copies just like before. I'm going to lie and say it's really, really huge, exactly as before. I'm actually running the exact same script, and I'm getting ready to do my delete. So this fire up another session now. Let that pop up. Okay, and so here we have the exact same process now. We've got two sessions, both now connected to the high service, and they're going to delete half the rows each. So let's set him going, and let's see how we go. So was it just under 15 seconds for the other two? Hopefully with the higher system now, we should obviously see we're getting, involving now parallel query, so we should be able to, churn through this work a lot more efficiently. So around about the same amount of time. Okay, maybe a bit faster, but 15 seconds, a little bit quicker, probably not as quick as we would have liked to have seen. And if I come to this one, well, this isn't so good, is it? That took 25 seconds. Man, that's a bit slow, isn't it? So let's have a look. So did it actually run? Yep, so this one did parallel degree 4, which is what we had expected. And this one did parallel degree 4, which is what we expected. Scroll a bit further. So we got access to more CPUs, and this one did indeed run a little bit faster, maybe a second or two faster. I was hoping it'd be a bit better than that. But this one really struggled. So what's going on here? Well, here's the problem. Parallel DML, when we're talking about changing a table, requires exclusive locks on objects. And this is one of those things where often people aren't aware of this. It's a bit like a direct mode insert. If I'm doing parallel DML, parallel update, delete, etc., the table must be locked. So while this session logged on and got exclusive access to the table and then cranked up 4 CPUs to actually churn through the data, this person, sorry, you've got to wait because they can't get access to the table. This session has it locked. That's why it took about 25 seconds. It literally waited for about 14 seconds and then finally got access and then churned through with its parallel data. So using medium and high services for parallel DML is fine as long as you have a lot of control over what's going on. Jobs that might have run in parallel before, and when I say parallel, are 2 different concurrent sessions as we saw initially in the low service, you can't just flip the switch on them and say, yep, let's just run them high. You need a bit more nuance to that in terms of how you're going to run these things. You would think, I'll probably need to run these in serial, one after the other. Now, you might be thinking, well, do I gain anything by doing that? Maybe not on a 4 CPU blocks, maybe not on a 4 CPU box like I've got here, but if I had 64 CPUs, then yes, I could probably crank the number of CPUs up to say 32 on each, get dramatically improved performance, but I'd have to run one after the other. I don't want to be running 2 things connected as medium or high against the same object at the same time because one of them's just going to sit there and wait. So let's explore a bit further. So having just said that, you might think, okay, so I don't want to be doing that. What I need to do is actually do it effectively one after the other. No problems. I'll do that. And let's see what explored here. So now I'm connected to high again. So I'm going to get some nice parallel facilities now. This is just a single copy of DBA objects. It's very, very small. Let's make it very, very big according to the database. So we've lied again. So as I said, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do a delete. The first delete first in the high service. I'd get parallel benefits here. And then I'd do the second delete. And I get a problem. Once again, be aware of the implications of doing parallel DML. Up until 23AI, where this restriction is lifted, in all versions before 23AI, including autonomous at the moment, if you do a parallel DML operation on a table, it not only locks the table, but once that operation is finished, you must end the transaction. You must either commit or roll back before starting again. The reason I wanted to put this in there is it's not just a case of taking whatever infrastructure you currently have, whatever programs you have, etc., and just going, yep, let's just change it from low to medium, medium to high. The key thing is understand the usage of these service levels because there are enormous benefits to be obtained as long as you understand how to get these benefits. As I said, it's probably most appropriate to only run a single thing in the high service if they're competing for the same object. Now, having done that, I'll crank the CPU count really, really high, but I have to understand the implications. It means also ending the transaction after each operation. Often for things like data warehouses, that's exactly what we want to do anyway, but you need to understand the benefits. Where people are getting caught out is they're running things in a low service. They go, I'd rather things were just a bit better. Let's just change every connect string to medium or high and expecting the exact same functionality. That's not how it's going to work and not how it's intended to work. Paolo said, if I looked at the performance page of Autonomous Database, you would see the wait events due to exclusive lock. Exactly right. That second session will be sitting there on an NQTM lock, just going, I'd like to get a table level lock, please. Just sitting there. And that would help you diagnose that something is going wrong. This is a classic. We have questions all the time. People saying, oh, I can see that Apex is running in the low service. Can I run Apex in the medium or high service? No, because what happens is medium and high force parallel DML. And so what will happen is every Apex internal query is going to run in parallel, which all of a sudden means your ability to have concurrent users evaporates. So be aware that there are implications. This is my sort of rule of thumb. I hate using that word rule of thumb, but vast majority of the time on your autonomous database, if you're running ATP, you'll probably do the TP service. If you're running ADW, you'll run the low service, unless you have particular tasks that want to use medium or high, and you understand the implications of doing so. For warehouse, if it's just parallel query, no drama. Parallel query will be fine because it doesn't take locks. But anything which is parallel DML, understand what the implications will be and understand that high and medium will immediately invoke those implications. So hopefully that all makes sense. Okay, someone said in low, can we run in parallel with hints? No, you cannot. Low will not allow you to run parallel. However, in autonomous transaction processing, you've got TP and TP urgent as two additional services. So you've got low, medium, high, and TP urgent. TP will not let you run in parallel. TP urgent will let you run in parallel with hints. So it won't force parallel, but it'll let you run parallel in hints. So for those things that are important in ATP, you can set them as TP urgent to allow access to parallel facilities. Okay, cool. That burned up some time, that one. Deary me. As will this one. Vector indexes. Here's the question that came in. I saw a clause called accuracy on the vector indexes of 23AI. What does that mean? How can an index not be accurate? And the easiest way to describe that is vector indexes are not your normal indexes. Now, I threw that slide in there and I thought, how am I going to explain this? So I've grabbed some slides out of a talk I've been doing recently on what I call an introduction to AI and vectors for people that don't know anything about it. That includes myself. So I was doing some slides for my own benefit. For those that are unaware, the whole premise behind vectors in AI is this concept of you can map anything, images, pictures, text, documents, etc., to a string of numbers. A vector is just a string of numbers. It's some magic function that preserves the meaning of the data by actually mapping things to numbers. Now, the way I thought I'd explain that, to at least give some context to why we need vector indexes, is I thought I would reinvent color television. So, as we know, any monitor that's been made in the last N years, every pixel on the screen is simply made up of three colors, red, green, and blue. So we can actually think of red, green, and blue as a vector representation for colors. So I just said vectors are you take data and you come up with a string of numbers. I'm going to do a very basic version of that, which is I'm going to take colors and convert them to a string of numbers, which happens to be RGB. That's effectively a vector, three numbers that represent something as a color. So if I took something which is predominantly red, so 75% red, 10% green, 10% blue, if I was drawing that in 3 dimensions, because I've got 3 elements here, I'd come across 10 for the green, across 10 for the blue, and then up 75 for the red, and it would plot about here in 3 dimensions. Sorry, it's back to the chat. When it comes to accessing Apex and ADB, yes, that's right. In ADB, we run Apex out of the low service. The pre-configured ADB you get is always in the low service. So yeah, just to answer that one. Let's now plot a second color. So now I'm going to color sort of a cyan-y blue kind of color, and that happens to be 50% red, 70% green, 70% blue. So once again, I come up 70 for the green, across 70 for the blue, up 70 for the red, and I get to about there. And then finally, I draw this one, which is a slightly lighter color of blue. So this one's 25% red, 75, 75. Once again, 75 across for the green, 75 along for the blue, and then 25 up for the red, and it lands about here. So this is effectively, vectors 101. I've taken something which has human meaning, color, and I've converted it to vectors, i.e. in this case, a list of RGB numbers, and I've got some information on the screen. If I look at those things, notice that the distance between them defines the similarity. These two are very closely located together and the colors are similar. These two here are not at all similar in terms of color, and they are a long way away from each other. This is the core concept of vectors when it comes to finding similar pieces of data in your database. The distance between the vector representation for that data represents the similarity of the data, whether it's colors, whether it's PDF documents, whether it's images, etc. It all comes down to converting the base data to vectors, and using some magic, those vectors preserve the meaning of the data with respect to distance. Close vectors, similar data. A long way apart vectors, not similar data. Vectors normally have up to 1,000 dimensions, but let's assume our vectors are all just in 3-dimensional space, like here. I've taken countless thousands of images and mapped them all to vectors and plotted them in 3 dimensions, and they might appear something like this. Now, typically, if I'm looking at, say, I've got a picture here of my dog, what other images do I have on my phone that are similar? So what I'm trying to do is, I'll pause that, I'm trying to find, here's a picture of my dog, which of all of these is closest to it? Because the vector representation, closeless means similar. So I know that if that's a picture of my dog, then that will be probably a picture of my dog as well. This would be a picture of something else because it's way over here. So that's why I plotted this thing. Where those vectors sit in n-dimensional space determines the similarity. Now, if I was doing this as a query, and I come with some sort of query vector like that, I've come in with this image, and I've got, this is my library of all the other images. Well, how do I do it? I have to work out the distance between those two, then that one, and that one. I have to scan every single other row in the table, work out the distance between it and my input vector to work out which is closest. That's a full table scan plus heavy-duty computation for every single row. And that begs the question, how to search this fast? Now, fundamentally, this is an unsolved problem, and you could argue maybe unsolvable problem. If I have to work out the distance between every single vector, unless I pre-compute that for every single row, then that's problematic because I can't do it unless that input vector is known in advance. The very next image I pick up requires a different distance to every single vector. It seems that the only way of doing this correctly is a full table scan with a vector calculation on every single row, and this is indeed true. So we introduced this concept of what we call vector indexes to try to speed up that search. But having said this is an unsolvable or unsolved problem, then we can't just build an index because we don't know what input vectors are coming. I might start with a picture of my dog, picture of my cat, picture of my girlfriend, etc. I don't know the distance from an input vector. So what we do is we compromise. We have to come up with compromise solutions which trade off between quickly getting the data and the accuracy of the data. So there's 2 techniques we use in 23AI. These aren't unique to Oracle. These are common techniques sort of in mathematical algebra about hunting down vectors that are close to a known vector. This is the first one we call neighborhood partitioned. Here's my input, my picture of my dog, and I'm trying to find which of all these other vectors is closest to it. I've shrunk it down just to 2-dimensional space here to keep the mathematics or the visualization very easy. So we can see it's probably that one or that one. But the only way we know that for sure is to scan every single row, and we're trying to avoid that. A neighborhood partitioned index, when you build it, says, let's go look at all the vectors in my table and look for groups. Look for groups of vectors that are fairly close together. And I've arbitrarily drawn some circles here. So we scan the table and we're trying to find groups of vectors. When we're building the index, rather than storing every single vector, we're going to store some information about the midpoint of each vector, of each group. So here's some groups, that's the midpoint, that's a bad drawing, but midpoint. Now when I come in with my query vector, rather than checking against every other single vector, I just check against the midpoints. So once again, I've chopped down very, very quickly the amount of work I have to do. Inside the index, I'm just storing these midpoints plus other metadata. So my query vector says, how am I close to this one, this one, this one, this one, this one? Once I've done that, I pick a small subset of them. In this case, I've picked 2. These are the 2 closest midpoints, so I'll restrict my search to just the vectors in these areas. And when I've done that, I say, okay, yep, they're the 3 closest, they're the 2 closest here, and I'd probably make a judgment call as to which is the closest one. But notice I managed to exclude from consideration a whole bunch of vectors because their midpoints were too far away. So when we talk about accuracy, there's obviously one fundamental problem here, is groups aren't always that defined. What if the grouping was, say, like this? I got this one query here, which is very close to my result, but it just so happens that the groupings I found, the midpoint was a long way away. So this whole group will be excluded from search, even though it turns out this vector may end up being the very closest one. My drawing's not that great here, but let's assume it was slightly more over here. So it might be the actual true result, the closest one, but because it just happened to fall into a group that didn't have the closest midpoint, it would be excluded. So as a result, a vector index is a compromise. We want to make the searching fast, but sometimes we're going to get mistakes. We're going to exclude rows we shouldn't have excluded. And that's the balancing act we do. The second kind of index we do follows a similar kind of line. It's called a neighborhood graph index. And as we know, if any kind of talk about graph technology is basically relationships between nodes. So you think about those sort of, I'm not sure how this will come out on the video on Zoom, but you think about those kind of fractal diagrams where as you keep drilling in, you get more and more detailed data and just keeps on going forever. I like to use that sort of mindset when it comes to these neighborhood graph indexes. Here's the same representation again. Rather than clumping stuff into groups, what we do is we say, okay, if I'm searching for the closest vector to this one, I'm going to start at some arbitrary point in there. The way this index is built is for each vector, we're storing some relationships to nearby vectors. So if I jump into the index here, it says, yep, I know about 3 other vectors, which is say 3 is 3. Don't take 3 as gospel. I'm just using this for simplicity of diagram. We then look at these 3 vectors. Okay, which of these is closest to our query vector? Turns out this one is. So then we jump to this one and look for its 3 friends. Whoops, maybe it was this one was closest. Okay, we jump for its 3 friends. Okay, this guy knows about these 3 people. 1, 2, and 3. Out of these 3, which of these is closest to the query vector? Turns out it's this one. Okay, based on that one, which 3 people does it know about? This, it knows about this one, and this one. We're following graph relationships and slowly moving toward our query vector, and we end up at this one, and that would be the closest one. Once we get to probably a set of vectors that are fairly close, we will do sort of a brute force search. In the same diagram, in sort of more of a hierarchical layer, is we enter the point in the index somewhere, we find the closest vectors and jump down to it, and then find its closest friend. And then we jump down to it, and we find its closest friend. When we get to a point where we're relatively close to our query vector, we're doing sort of a greedy search across all the nearbys to find the closest ones. So this is the other sort of scenario. We've got the divide the data into groups, hence neighborhood partitioned, or follow a chain of graphical links, hence neighborhood graph, to hone in on the closest results, always with that risk that we might discard a row that should have actually been retained. So that is that accuracy cross trade-off we have when it comes to vector indexes. And to answer the question, that's why when you create these indexes, you nominate this target accuracy. You're saying, how big is my index and therefore slower to navigate? Am I prepared to have it to gain more accuracy? If I say target accuracy 20%, my index will be blindingly fast because it's incredibly small. It's very small nodes in it, but I'm only going to get the right answer 20% of the time. We have this balancing act. I think in our current version of 23 AI, you nominate the accuracy. That obviously will continue going forward, but I think in an upcoming version, I'm making this up, 23.8, 23.9, there is some upcoming version coming where we can automatically do some accuracy calculations for you. So you can nominate, for example, what index size you want to have, and we'll work out the best accuracy for that, etc. So there's some nice automation coming in future RUs as well. That brings me to 10 o'clock, so we didn't get to everything. So as we seamlessly jump to the end, we'll save the other ones for my next office hours session. Let me kill off the share. As always, hopefully you found that all interesting. I know each month I generally bounce around from topic to topic, but I enjoy this. It's good learning for me, and also I think it represents what's coming in from the community when they ask Tom questions or they hit me up on DMs, etc. If you have specific questions, you're always welcome to throw them to me my way. I'll either answer them there and then when we're doing DMs and stuff, or they'll be on LinkedIn or blog posts, or I'll tackle them in office hours. So hopefully you got some value out of that. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It's always good to have you. Thank you for giving up your time. I'm going to have a rest now because it's been a long 18-hour day. But hopefully I'll see you at a conference event somewhere in the next 4 or 5 weeks or so. If not, I'll see you next month on office hours. Take care, stay safe, and keep using the Oracle database. Bye for now, everybody.